discussion in the call, Looking at Canada and when Architecture Meets Societal Changes, outlined a context for architecture within social values in Canada, their transformation into social movements, and the consequent effects on the built environment in Canada. The period of intense social, political, and urban transformations of the decades 1960 to 1980 was set up as a diagram. Early on, a basic diagram or set of twin concerns emerged that considered the phenomenon of architecture in Canada as both an architectural and urban form question, but one fundamentally intertwined with social and political forces. A few key texts, including A Fair Country by John Ralston Saul, served as foundational texts. To the mythologies of the French and British foundations of Canada, Saul clarified the integral position of First Nations. Saul defined Canada as a Métis nation, a hybrid, founded on the values and practices of inclusion, plurality, and mediation. Our literature review also included social and political texts on the formation of public institutions and social movements in Canada. And Nicholas Olsberg's writings would help to connect Canadian modern architecture with the social and political conditions of the past century. From our theoretical readings on modern architectural discourse of megastructure or megaform, 4 texts emerged very early on that established a historical context and defined key terms for our research. The publication of the proceedings of the Siam Congress in 1951, entitled Heart of the City, presents a discussion of the notion of the urban core. Neither exclusively architecture or urban design, the core concept emerges in the post-World War II reconstruction and the simultaneous phenomenon of suburban sprawl. Analogous to the thinking of megaform that would develop later, the core proposes to condense many of the functions and programs of the city into thick, dense nodes where the historical or new city would establish a built platform for civic culture. From Rainer Bannon's historiographical and critical review, Megastructure, Urban Futures of the Recent Past, 3 qualities emerged that could be said to cut across megastructure's experiments and help to situate the contemporary definition of megaform. First, the megastructural project accommodates a multiplicity of programs and uses, both formal and informal, sanctioned and emergent activities. Furthermore, the scale of the megastructure exceeds the purpose of any one clear building type, pushing architecture into the realm of urban design. Finally, the transformation of the megastructure through extension, contraction, aggregation or dispersion, openness or finitude presents a new concern for architecture as something flexible, adaptable, and adaptive. To Bannon's retroactive survey and definition of megastructure, the architect and academic Fumiko Maki put forward a morphological conception of architectural groupings of variable density and relatedness in his investigations in collective form. And finally, the fourth sort of key text was Kenneth Frampton's Megaform as Urban Landscape. The concept of megaform is addressed as a question of landform. Distinguishing itself from megastructure, the megaform is defined as a horizontal development, a large-scale architectural platform continuous with the urban fabric, articulating a shift in the megaform from architectural object to landscape in architecture's urban fabric.
As part of the research residency, we had the opportunity to consult projects in the archive here at the CCA. The experience of primary source material, including living drawings and textual records, represents an invaluable contribution to our research project. Our intensive days in the archive marked a special time to observe, analyze, and read through first-hand material. Our initial selection of the projects from the archive included mostly Canadian works from the 1960s to 80s, as well as other international projects of this period that pertain to megaform, megastructure, or collective form phenomena. Some highlights were Arthur Erickson's Robson Square, Melvin Charney's Corridor, Van Ginkel's plan for Old Montreal, as well as New Williamstown Laboratory Community. Victor Press's Expo Stadium, Cedric Price's Potteries Thinkbelt, and Aldo Rossi's Locomotiva 2. Discussions proceeded on defining architectural concepts of projects seen in the archive, as well as other important precedents found in our readings, to clarify and refine an approach to the megaform. Drawing out formal mechanisms, architectural language, social implications, and urban concepts from these projects revealed some key common themes. formulation of 3 Megaform sub-themes, infrastructure, landscape, and collectivity, was done as a way to set out individual investigations for S3 within the collective research project. We use these sub-themes as umbrella terms to lay out a thematic territory, intentionally playing with language to leave some degree of openness to interpretation. The sub-themes serve as lenses through which to analyze a case study and offer a multidimensional, multi-scale reading of the Megaform as public project. First, infrastructure refers to the Megaform's conception as urban system and its elaboration of network thinking from regional to architectural scale. Projects such as Price's Potteries Think Belt and Van Ginkel's New Williamstown explore the megastructure through modularity, flexibility, and mobility from regional planning to design at the human scale. Second, landscape refers to an ideology of national expression and an architectural strategy of the Megaform for designing public environments, raising questions of identity and placemaking. Arthur Erickson's Museum of Anthropology deals literally with the framing of the landscape, more so than his campus design for Simon Fraser, which goes further to establish an urban terrain within the vast landscape. Thirdly, collectivity refers to the Megaform application as a public platform for social infrastructures. This sub-theme extends to both ends of design. First, the intentions of publicness, and then the reception and appropriation of the public. An important social infrastructure of the period that adopted the Megaform as a social apparatus was post-secondary education. University campus designs such as UQAM in Montreal and Scarborough College outside Toronto both represent seminal examples, yet different approaches of the Megaform in both urban and non-urban contexts.
From our broader research on public megaforms, Robson Square was chosen as a case study that exemplifies megaform thinking, being a large-scale project within an urban context in Canada. Robson Square is a multi-programmatic civic complex in Vancouver designed by Arthur Erickson with the collaboration of the landscape architect Cornelia Hahn Oberlander in the years 1973 to 1983. We can see here in this schematic plan on the far left, you have block 71, which houses the courthouse, then block 61 with the provincial government offices, and then right, the block 51 with the Vancouver Art Gallery. A variety of cultural and public functions are then intertwined within the 3 blocks. A megaform typology was adopted as a solution to bring together law, government, and art, and to define the new heart of Vancouver. Robson Square was designed as an open social framework for the citizens, where the entire 3 blocks became a continuous public landscape. The complex reveals an architecture that materializes Canadian values of the time and serves as a cultural platform for social democracy. As a pinnacle of the era of megaform projects in Canada, Robson Square was created as a symbolically open and inclusive environment for the Vancouver public. Also, a contemporary reading of Robson Square reinforces the project's persistence over time as a vital public space for the city of Vancouver. After choosing our case study, we tried to understand comprehensively the project through extensive research. We went back into the Arthur Erickson and Cornelia Oberlander archives in the CCA collection and looked at a variety of documents, whether it was textual records, sketches, construction drawings, or photographs. At that point, we also consulted many books, magazines, and newspaper articles that related to Robson Square at different moments in time. We also revisited our initial timeline, which you can see here, by juxtaposing the main Robson Square events, seen here in red, with the publications on Megaform, seen on top in pink, and then the government in place below the timeline, and finally, the main national events that influence the public realm. This exercise of cross-reading those events crystallized for us a multi-layered understanding of Robson Square as a public megaform. An outcome of our experience here has been the completion of a book. It represents a collective effort and is the result of a compilation of individual and collective written work. The first part introduces our understanding of the megaform as both modern architectural phenomena and the outcome of the specific Canadian context of the time, we formatted it in a way to convey our ideas through images and quotes drawn from the archive material and publications consulted in the CCA collection and library. The following presentation of our investigations on Robson Square will be done through our three thematics of Megaform as public project, infrastructure, landscape, and collectivity.
So I think a few copies of the book are up here if you want to test them. Spend a little bit of time.
I love this.
Like so many North American and European cities at the middle of the last century, Vancouver was a city experiencing sprawling growth in the form of suburban housing developments. In the late 1950s, when Vancouver's population was facing post-war growth and housing boom, Vancouver was actually dismantling its urban transit system. Its two interurban train lines and streetcar system were shut down in September 1958. Its extensive SkyTrain transit system, no model for urban transit systems, was not initiated until the push leading up to Vancouver hosting the World Exposition in 1986, where the themes of the exposition was transportation. The 1960s was a period of intense civic engagement in Vancouver and across many Canadian urban centres. Public interest manifested in citizen movements, including projects that sought to resist excessive development pressures on historical urban fabric. Vancouver would have its own defining citizen movements that challenge urban clearance projects, including the Chinatown Revolt, which helped turn public opinion against the freeway plan that would have cut through Vancouver's historical core in 1967. In Toronto, Jane Jacobs would also help lead a campaign that would eventually reroute an expressway, avoiding it coming through the historic core of the city. In Montreal, the astute planning proposal by Blanche and Sandy Van Ginkel would avert a similar expressway push that threatened the historical fabric. We had the opportunity to look at their plan for downtown Montreal, and it was crucial in successfully defining the value of historic architecture for Montreal and actually connecting the tired or ailing historical fabric with the first walled city of Montreal in the 17th century. As mentioned in our introductory remarks, the proceedings of the 1951 Congress entitled The Heart of the City, the Core, announced a new focus for urban architecture. The project for a core constituted a radical departure within modernist urban planning and from any ambition to plan the city in its entirety. Its strategy is geared instead to the fragment, the civic kernel, an embryo of an intense urbanity. The Congress of 1951 would also distill the meaning of the core as that of a rendezvous, a public meeting place. The core would ultimately serve a civic function and reframe the historic center as akin to the politicized space of the Greek agora. And that's in the Simon's words. Within the expanding privatized territory of sprawl, the core would offer civic moments of precise figures of publicness. Quote, such civic centers would consolidate democratic governments, for the lack of them and the dependence of the people on controlled means of information makes them more easily governable by the rule of the few. The creation of these centers is a government job, federal, state, municipal. These elements cannot be established on a business basis. They are necessary for the city as a whole and even for the nation, and they should be publicly financed. Participation would be the goal, the opportunity for all types of people to inhabit, congregate, and exchange ideas. Unquote. Robson Square emerges in this discursive and urban context and can be situated as a late modernist attempt to reinvent the historic city fabric as an essential public forum for the city. Arthur Erickson and Jeffrey Massey's 1966 plan for Vancouver's core, which would establish the ground for Robson, would extend the concern for the historic core with an unprecedented architectural and urban plan for Vancouver. While making its claim to being based on the most advanced thinking core of the time, the Erickson-Massey proposal bears close resemblance to the definition of the core established nearly 15 years previous at Siam. The whole list, in fact, is used in the later Erickson proposal. A few in particular regarding circulation will develop. Urged by municipality and citizenry eager to establish public space in a civic square in a rapidly commercializing urban environment, the 1966 plan by Erickson and Massey lays down many site strategies which will continue into Robson's final configuration. In response to the province's agenda to establish a centralized and adequate space for court function, the proposal forgoes an enlargement of the historical provincial court in favor of relocating it to a new facility. The old courthouse would be maintained, but as a civic facility. The exact location of the blocks in the program of the proposal would shift over the decade as complex negotiations for sales, leases, and subleases were established between private interests and the municipal and provincial levels of government. As mentioned in the discussion on the court, traffic movement on the peninsula and the site became a determining feature of the three-block structure and its architectural expression. Major traffic was rerouted to a proposed ring road along the edge of the peninsula. Automobile parking was restricted to below-grade lots and garages on the interior blocks, while transit and trucks considered as service were put 1 and 2 stories below grade. Provisions and negotiations for light rail transit directly below the project, depicted in this diagram, would continue until construction began in 1973. But would never happen. And the absence of this below-grade transit system would in fact be would a major blow for the below-ground elements of the program. From this configuration, a multi-layered system or form emerges which attempts to privilege pedestrians at grade. Robson and Granville Street are identified as main retail corridors in the proposal, proposed as pedestrian-only areas. Pedestrian-only arcades were the line sections of Granville and Robson Street. Logistical and practical reasons eventually kept multimodal flow through the site along Robson. Though recent pushes appear that the recent move to close traffic on Robson Street during the summer may be extended to realize the initial vision of Robson as a pedestrian-only space. Basic or schematic diagram of the circulation on the site is depicted here on the bottom, suggesting the continuity of pedestrian movement through the entire site, from the art gallery down through the below-grade connection, because Robson was never closed, on through the plaza and in through the courthouse. The general development form, the strict separation of the movement according to transportation mode, in part turned its back on the city, positioning the project as an urban island unto itself. In an interview conducted with James Chang, one of the architects of the original Robson project, suggested that in fact Central Park was a major precedent and was being discussed in the office at the time. However, the underlying strategy leading to the plan of articulating pedestrian areas around the automobile and transit movement, and not the reverse, ultimately chooses not to abandon the existing grid. The strict separation of mobilities, such as cars from pedestrians, would eventually open to an acknowledgement of the public nature of the street and its place in social exchange and urban vitality. While the project's main plaza and connective tissue establish a fixed position between the anchor buildings, it is its flexibility of program, block structure, and surface continuities that connected to the principles of incremental transformation that connected to Mackey's discussion of group form in investigations on collective form. Mackey cites some of the basic ideas of group form in historical examples of town building and bazaars that develop incrementally while maintaining the coherence of identity. The paradox of the megaform, as noted by Franklin, facilitating a sense of place while serving as a catalyst for change, requires an inherent tension between the stability and the resistance and the identity of the architectural work and its openness to pedestrian movement, gathering, and transformation of the site. The sense of accumulation and change in the framework that a city or democracy is always a work in progress is effectively put in play within an urbanistic assemblage such as Robson Square. Robson's basic urban block morphology, basic 3-block urban block morphology, continuous with architectural services and public programming, opens the site to growth and transformation. Though its built edges define a hard perimeter, the project's basic block morphology ensures the project's continuity with existing and future pedestrian and vehicular flow. The site houses an assemblage of public programs used in assembly. The surface continuity and programmatic connections to the city, with its unpredictable social, economic, political dynamics, interact with Robson's permanent social infrastructure to create indeterminate effects and future possibilities for the site. The sense of accumulation and change in the framework that a city or democracy is always a work in progress, sorry for repeating myself, posits time and transformation as essential to the success of an urban assemblage such as Robson Square.
Challenging the notion of landscape as a static image of national identity, the term landscape encompasses a larger and more abstract meaning in the context of Robson Square. Reevaluating the ideology of landscape, the discussion of the term will divert away from the kitschy depiction of the Canadian environment to reveal the landscape-like architecture of the Megaform. The concept of landscape is interpreted here as a question of monumentality and milieu. Reflecting larger socio-political aspirations, the project for a civic core articulates a new form of monumentality, shifting from symbolic form to symbolic milieu. The urban landscape created by Robson Square represents a Megaform solution for a civic complex and a public environment in the heart of the city. Robson Square, along with many public works in Canada during the 1960s to 1980s, raised questions of national identity. Canada's increasing international presence and involvement in global affairs at the time placed the country on the world stage. The coming out period in Canadian history triggered questions of identity in areas of culture, society, and politics. The search of national expression translated into architecture and influenced the design of public projects of this period. Expo 67 in Montreal was a chance for modern Canada to open up to the world and define its position as a progressive nation. The Expo grounds served as an opportunity for international architects to experiment in avant-garde thinking. For Canadian architects, it became a platform to showcase the spirit and identity of the country. Many Megaform projects were produced during the event, such as Place Bonaventure, which proposed an innovative dialogue with the urban context. In Rainer Banham's Megastructure, Urban Futures of the Recent Past, he dedicates a whole chapter to Montreal, where he discusses the city's downtown underground network, developed during the Expo, as being a megastructure. Built through both public and private agency, respectively, the metro system and commercial development off of it, the subterranean network simulates a kind of city fabric in a unique climatized environment. Banham argues that its particular mechanism of creating an urban condition provides resilience to the megaform or megastructure concept. The Expo Stadium seen here, designed by Victor Price, is a megaform project that illustrates an attempt to shape the collective through formal articulation. Price created a topographic mise-en-scène structure for various Expo events that would maintain visual connections with the surrounding landscape. This was achieved by breaking up the stadium seating into spaced apart modular units where gaps between would offer views out to the river and city beyond. The building conveyed a kind of Canadian sensibility to context. The interpretation of landscape in a national architectural style is very much apparent in the work of Arthur Erickson. The architect of Robson Square and many other public works of the time played a major role in drawing out a national aesthetic. The influence of landscape in Erickson's buildings translates beyond a literal image to an approach of contextual mediation. His buildings serve as fitting expressions of Canadian social values, making him, as Nicholas Goldsberg claims, the chosen architectural prophet of a new democracy. Robson Square began as a quest to define a civic core in downtown Vancouver as a symbolic expression of government and a place for the public realm. The landscape approach of the project exemplifies an experiment in monumentality. A radical change in the design of the civic core following the election of new provincial political leadership speaks of a shift in the desired public image of civic buildings. The original design for the complex consisted of a 55-story tower in the park scheme, seen here in this model. In 1973, the imposing symbolic image of the tower was rejected by the newly elected New Democratic Party, NDP, in favor of a horizontal megaform. As a symbolic political move, the tower form now lies on its side. The public surface of the park is no longer separated from the government program in the tower, but rests on top of and carries through the Megaform structure. The civic project was to serve as a monument to a more transparent and inclusive government, portraying an image of the NDP and their leader, David Barrett. The drastic change of schemes is characteristic of the historic discourse on monumental architecture. In 1951, issues of monumentality and questions of the symbolic manifestation of society were raised at Siam's 8th conference. Members such as Gideon argued for a reconquest of monumental expression, where human scale and the spontaneity of urban life were advocated as the foundations for a contemporary civic image. Even in the Canadian scene, Melvin Charney proposes a shifting role of the architect in the design of civic monuments from symbolic form to symbolic space of public appropriation. In constant negotiation with its surroundings, the architecture of the Megaform characteristically deals with context and landscape. Robson Square reveals a particular interrelation of architecture and landscape in creating an urban meteor. Arthur Erickson's portfolio of works exhibits a creative contextual sensibility. In particular, his large public projects embody a landscape-like architecture that responds to, extends, or introduces questions of context. These considerations of surrounding an immediate site were distinctive in Erickson's scenographic designs. In comparing the Megaform of Simon Fraser, seen here in Robson Square, two different approaches can be observed in Erickson's treatment of context in both urban and non-urban settings. In Simon Fraser University campus outside Vancouver, built in 1965, the figure of the Megaform situates itself within the natural backdrop, framing the landscape beyond, in addition to setting up an urban terrain of sorts. Since there are no urban forces to draw from in its surroundings, the Megaform structure creates its own conditions of organicity. Reversely, in Robson Square, the project deals with context by becoming the site of an urban landscape within the city. The former Robson absorbed surrounding urban forces while proposing new pedestrian circulation through the entire three-block complex. In the process, the landscape-like architecture defines environmental conditions of an artificial terrain. The notions of a continuous public surface of the Megaform carry through from the exterior to interior. In his contextual approach, Erickson not only deals with the surrounding context, but expressively proposes a new one within it. In the staggering diversity of architectural typology and functions found on the site, landscape design serves as a unifying strategy for the entire three-block complex. An integration of natural elements in the park-like setting with the architecture of the Megaform represents a more literal but still significant application of the concept of landscape. The success of the civic core is widely attributed to the collaboration between architecture and landscape architecture. Cornelia Hahn Oberlander was brought onto Robson Square in 1974 and played a central role in the development of a terraced urban park. The landscape design strategy involved an integrated approach of natural elements in built structure. The overall intention was to create an interesting relationship between the fixed components and the dynamic play of natural elements throughout the season. This relationship was studied in plan as well as in section in considering the experiential qualities of landscape design. Oberlander pursued extensive studies on new forms of plant-growing medium and innovative irrigation systems. A variety of planting types were applied throughout the complex, including walkway plantings, box planters, and flying planters. The horizontal bands of box planters provide visual continuity of the lateral facades. A similar landscape treatment is carried through the interior of the law courts, where box planters align the edges of floors over the atrium space. Reflecting pools and waterfalls also contribute to the natural setting of the linear park. Oberlander's landscape design extended the architectural gesture and provided a much-desired urban park setting in the city center. The overlaid and integrated concept of landscape with the architecture of the Megaform has played an essential role in defining the character and image of Robson Square. In the context of the Megaform, landscape involves a more abstract understanding of the term as it relates to a particular architectural strategy for designing collective environments. The challenge of landscape represents an opportunity for Megaform architecture to design meaningful built environments in both natural and urban settings. Very much apparent in the example of Robson Square, the urban Megaform becomes a powerful civic gesture and social platform in the city.
The notion of collectivity is intrinsic to Robson Square, as a three-block Megaform unveils a variety of public programs. The initial intentions that were voiced, either coming from Erickson, the citizens of Vancouver, or the political forces, reveal a strong intention of inclusion and openness, reflective of the national politics of the time. The success of the different mechanisms that participated in shaping the collective can be evaluated through the reception of the project and through public appropriation of the complex since its completion. Beside the initial involvement of Barrett's MVP government in the design of Robson Square, different agents were participating to the discussion on what should be the space as the project was taking shape. Erickson strongly believed that public input should be part of the design process. In a letter addressed to the Deputy Minister of Public Works in 1973, he wrote, quote, "Citizens' involvement in the past have been negatively oriented as protest actions. It is important to redirect public concern in a positive way, but this requires a great deal of study and effort by everyone concerned. We suggest, rather than large confrontations, meeting at a smaller group level with continuing discussions over an extended period of time. The greatest value of citizen participation lies in its potential for public education to increase awareness of the urban environment, as well as a research tool for planners and designers to uncover hidden issues and values." End of quote. Found in Erickson's archive at the CCA are many evidences that testify the importance of the community voice in his designs for Robson Square. Among them are voting sheets for meeting inquiring on the design of the project and letters from citizens asking for different components, such as a reflecting pool or a cinema. Also, the Robson Square project was exhibited in 1973 at the Vancouver Public Library, after which Arthur Erickson received multiple comments from the citizens. It is important to mention that the Ministry of Public Works was strongly involved in voicing the people's opinion on the design and the program of the project. The department would correspond with Erickson and forward commentaries from the citizens to him. This practice was certainly in sync with the vision of the Barrett government newly in place, and at a broader scale with the national vision of Erickson's friends, Prime Minister Trudeau, of creating a Canadian community based on fairness and democracy. Notions of sharing can be found in Arthur Erickson's writing when he expresses strong opinions on giving favor to community versus individuality. He was firmly opinionated when talking about the urge of regaining values of sharing in the way we live today. The architect also evoked concepts of plurality and awareness of the unique in a text titled Sharing, the Choice is Ours, that was found in the Cornelia Oberlander archive in the CCA collection. The architectural articulation of Robson Square, using a variety of spatial mechanisms, translates Erickson's ideal of creating a new type of community based on notions of sharing and urbanity. For instance, the fact that some office space floors in Block 61 are located below grade to favor public space on the roof clearly indicates the priority given to the most universal space of the building. Erickson also translated aspects of publicness and openness inside the complex through smoothly connecting spaces. Even though there is in Robson Square a gradient of accessibility found in the different programs, from the very public art gallery to the semi-public courthouse, the architecture expresses continuity between the three blocks that convey to the whole complex its image of inclusiveness. By intertwining fairly different programs, which are the new courthouse, government offices, and a cultural center with a public space, Erickson creates a new environment of its own. The proximity of the different functions of the civic complex becomes an opportunity to encourage exchanges and give a new pulse to the city. The new core, by its mixed-use programmatic articulation, becomes a platform for mass society to interact. Erickson, who had an aversion for North American planning practices that would segregate uses, approached the project having in mind to, quote, humanize an otherwise narrow function by expanding a utilitarian program to a larger cultural reference, end of quote. The suggestion of fairness was also translated through the execution of particular details. For instance, the strand, a zigzagging hybrid of a ramp and stairs, was developed by Erickson's team as a device to allow front door right for the disabled. The integrated path becomes a natural extension of the street up to the roof garden, allowing for a natural movement of the public. By inviting citizens to walk up, but also to stop or sit, the strump is understood here as a civilizing device that allows for appropriation and illustrates plurality and inclusion. This ensemble of strategies used by Erickson in Robson Square and his symbolic use of transparency in the courthouse building demonstrate his clear understanding of the key role that would play a new civic core in shaping the collective aspect of the city. Different proposals through time have been developed by providing new programs and by increasing the site's exposure to stimulate public interest. In 1999, Erickson made a proposal to improve the public space in Robson Square. His series of interventions consisted of the implementation of new retail space, the removal of the bronze domes, the addition of new escalators, and the expansion of the Vancouver Art Gallery. The proposal never materialized, but it demonstrates how committed was Arthur Erickson in activating the public realm. From its opening, Robson Square was celebrated by the International Prix, winning, for instance, the 1979 ASLA President's Award of Excellence, with the jury highlighting the integration of architecture and landscape architecture. The new civic core faced early criticism at local scale, but proved to be very popular over the years, being animated all year long and drawing up to 50,000 people for some events. Robson Square became a defining element of the city, staging a variety of outcomes of public appropriation, such as Occupy Vancouver movement, the 2010 Olympic celebrations, the Canucks riots, the New Year's celebrations, etc. Those various spatial appropriations, whether they are Pacific celebrations or insurgencies, reveal the success of Robson Square in being a sensible space that shapes the collective. Lately, multiple discussions were held on the core maintenance of Robson Square. It must be said that even though function in the complex has shifted through time, they are still maintaining the public nature of the site. In the past 3 years, Vancouver's public space program, called Viva Vancouver, closed Robson Street between blocks 51 and 61, and organized a design competition for street furniture that would activate the public realm. The intensive center of gravity for the public now happens off the popular thoroughfare of Robson Street, leaving the Stramps, the Mound, and the Sunken Plaza for a less hectic retreat. Such events demonstrate that Robson Square is still relevant in its capacity to foster community and generate appropriation of space. Robson Square was also targeted as our case study because it is a current object of debate, mainly due to the coming displacement of the Vancouver Art Gallery. The gallery announced its moving in 2007, and a competition was launched for the new building. As Arthur Erickson had developed an idea in 1999 to increase the gallery's exhibition space, Cornelia Oberlander and architect Bing Tom opposed themselves to the moving of the gallery when it was announced. Bing Tom said to the Vancouver Sun in 2010, quote, "The whole idea of moving the Vancouver Art Gallery needs to be looked at again. The Olympics proved that Robson Square may be the most valuable, most exciting real estate in Canada. Arthur believed his expansion plan would work, and I do too." End of quote. Despite mobilizations from architects and planners against the project, the Georgia and Cambie site was announced in 2013 to be receiving the new Vancouver Art Gallery, with a building to be designed by architects Herzog and Dermot. The art gallery represents an important public anchor on the site, and its removal might be harmful for public activation. The question of altering the original program is delicate, since the gallery's contribution to the complex was to play a key role as cultural beacon and to act as an incentive platform for public gathering. Looking at the larger picture, what we could interpret as recent contemporary megaforms, such as the Bibliothèque Nationale building by Pat Cow here in Montreal, could also be set against 1960s public megaform projects to consider their nature and outcome. The megaform concept in today's Canadian built environment should be evaluated for its value in shaping the public realm and initiating a broader discussion on Canadian identity and common values.
I have a question about that critical shift that seemed to happen sometime around 1974 from this mega tower, also authored by Arthur Erickson's group, to the horizontal landform. There's a switch of government. I wondered through the archival research that you did whether there was any more information about what critical things happened to revision what could be done in this site.
Feel free, I will start.
I think it was very much it very much represented a political move. The newly elected party was very soon keen on rejecting the proposals from previous leadership. So it was very much what we understand was kind of a symbolic political move. In reconsidering how this scheme, the symbol of government as being this this very striking tower now sits below an urban park. So it was very much a kind of political move, symbolic to sort of position almost the needs of the public for an urban park over that and more that of the government program.
When you look at the tower, and this maybe is an okay sort of version of it, what's clear is there's a difference between the architectural expression of this tower and the public reaction to the notion of tower. And so I think there's much more continuity between this version of the tower and the monumentality of the given site. This image shows it a bit, but it's actually a set of four thin, very thin towers connected in the middle. The street actually goes beneath the tower. The street is allowed to go through the tower. So many of Erickson's notions of porosity, both visual and in terms of movement of the city, were there in the tower. And I think it was just the association of towers at the time was just, there was a disconnection between people's access to towers. It's a commercial modality of the tower, right? But I do see, I do view this tower as a uniquely public tower, a uniquely contextual tower.
Comments? Questions? Go ahead, feel free.
You stress the Canadian identity in some way, but I wonder if you noted a certain relation to projects by some architects and landscape architects of northwest United States, Entre, for example, from Seattle and Washington, Oregon State, for public spaces, of course. So I see some similarities.
Yeah.
Who wants to answer?
I mean, we didn't show one of the clearest examples, which James Chang pointed us to, which was Kevin Roche's Oakland Art Museum, which was published just before they started designing it. Apparently it was off their walls. And it's a very sophisticated, it's the same, very similar notion of a smaller scale, a gallery or a subterranean gallery with a kind of terrace, very sophisticated landscaped terrace. I don't think we were suggesting that the landscape strategy was inherently Canadian, per se. I don't think.
I think, for us, we looked at a number of precedents that were not Canadian and found some similar adoptions of this megaform idea. But for us, it was very interesting, if anything, to juxtapose the Canadian-specific socio-political climate and the institutions that were born out of government policies at the time, and how the Canadian government adopted the megaform for a lot of these social infrastructures. So there were a lot of other we thought was very interesting to again look at the Canadian-specific socio-political context more than necessarily the architectural, the sort of Canadian aesthetic.
Yeah, just the last point would be the notion that this would be maintained as a purely public space and still is both criticism and something that wouldn't happen properly in other contexts. It's almost pulling both through the blocks, and one sort of misses almost that private commercial development that presumably would also be present in many other contexts.
Yeah. First of all, I would like to congratulate you guys because it was really a very, very interesting lecture, and I know that it's very difficult to work together sometimes if you don't know each other, and we had a short amount of time to prepare everything. I think it was very, very well structured and very, very interesting. My question is maybe related to this structured lecture because you each spoke and then you each spoke again, and then there are like 3 teams and you 3 people. And I was wondering if these 3 sub-themes, infrastructure, landscape, and the connectivity, are only gazes that you have conceived yourselves in order to structure the work and the lecture, or if they were also designing tools at that time, and if so, if they were very complementary or at sometimes really opposing. How was the relationship between infrastructure and urbanism and landscape, for instance, and who was helping who in a certain way? I don't know if my answer is, my question is clear. But I was really hoping that in the end, after each of the presentations,
There was a-
that there was like one little.
I was expecting as well.
So I'm just curious if you can like draw some lines between the 3 different, very well explained sub-teams.
I think for us at first, drawing out these themes was a way, within the larger collective project, for us to go on our sort of separate ways and to have these different interpretations of the Megaform based on those, what we would kind of call umbrella terms, let's say. And then it was kind of an interesting exercise because we started with individual essays of the Megaform based on this thematic. Again, always looking at the case study, Robson Square. So that was sort of the first step. And then for our presentation and for the final book was when we sort of brought these 3 essays together, realized sort of what ideas or what even sort of historical contexts were complementing these, and how we could then string them in a cohesive and clear way to tell the story of Robson Square as a Megaform public project.
We also, part of the reason we chose them is that they loosely represented different scales of the project, right? So we tried to sort of work from a more general infrastructural urban scale down to the notion of landscape and collectivity. And they were defined as much by their differences and the tension between their differences, and we liked that they were different so that they would be reflecting on different facets of very much the same object, which is the site.
Do you have anything in mind?
I mean, it was the.
You have been closing.
Yeah. We didn't decide of those thematics before going to the archives. It's really by looking at all this variety of Megaform, megastructure projects that those thematics came out. And it was ways for us also to define the notion of Megaform, and we used them within the Robson Square project to really crystallize this notion of Megaform as public project. But there was definitely some overlaps when we were writing, and we had to say, okay, no, don't talk about this, I'll talk about it, because, and even now I think there was still some little overlaps, but yeah, they're definitely in link, and it was just, as Kevin was saying, also a way to approach the project with different scales. So yeah, I think there's definitely many links between the thematics.
Anyone else? Who wants to comment? origin of the plot, the reading of all the books, the bibliography that has been compiled, and this recurrent reference to the Museum conference and the core of the city, the hub. Can we elaborate a bit more about the core and the issue of monumentality and how this has been, one of the topics, of the issue that Erickson had to face, and how much this becomes like a fil rouge or a trend, or maybe never became in the Canadian architectural scene. It's interesting to see, how much I have the feeling, and we have been working together, that core, heart of the city monumentality, it's like megastructure, megaform. They become part of your own embedded vocabulary, but how do we elaborate a bit more about these terms? They are very heavy loaded. Oh, okay. Here we have a good image of monumental, or monumentality.
Well, I think, both these kind of ideas brought up in time, kind of, both the heart of the city and monumentality are kind of, things that we were able to almost read through the Robson Square example. And, it comes also, it's appeared within the international architectural discourse where the megaform comes in. And I think the megaform, if anything, is kind of standing in as the architectural outcome of this shift, almost as outlined in these summary meetings for the core. It became kind of what we call kind of architectural innovation in city making, where and referencing monumentality is more so kind of this shift from the architectural object or the symbolic form of the architectural object to the megaform, which is one kind of we use the word platform and terrain and surface, and so this shift in architectural thinking within the modern architectural discourse is very much something discussed at Science 8, which is why we brought it in the case study of Robson Square. And again, core and monumentality, those two key terms.
Can you what do you want to know about the core? I'm not, you sort of set out, to tell, do you want us to tell you more about the core and monumentality?
I go to the page of the book, the heart of the city, and I know, the famous essay by Gideon, Serd, and Leger on monumentality and civic, and the value of the civic value of monumentality. But still, when you go through the book, you hardly see monuments in terms of quote-unquote megastructure. And I see there almost not a contradiction, but I want to try to elaborate a bit more how much this can be, one of the possible reading of the core. Is Kenneth Rainer Bannon coming, it's almost 20 years later, and redefine the core through the megastructure and the technical approach. This is not exactly what I feel it's the core of the matter. There is something that we should elaborate a bit, maybe more in terms of also of, no, I don't want to say chronology, but the way people approach also monumentality, some of the historians. And when I say people, some of the participants in the story. Think about, Gideon going back to the eternal present. Monumentality doesn't only mean big. Monumentality is not another word for small, medium, large, and extra large, which at a certain moment, with all this analogies, can become kind of troll. And that's what I want to discuss. But maybe, it's too large. You don't have to one, so we throw this issue around. Madame, I know that there is something there, maybe not yet right.
Could you come back to the Bibliothèque Nationale here? Because it was designed by a Vancouver architect. And I didn't really understand your finale there. But you just kind of reshape it or something, because it is, you said it's a Megaform, because it's horizontal.
Could be interpreted.
And it was a huge success collectively, and the identity of the two was quite, Montrealers were really, really proud of it.
Yeah.
So it has a park and all that. Could you refine that or put chewing gum in?
Yeah. I think with the Vancouver Art Gallery moving, it brings up this question of what's the future of Megaform. Because also by the public, sometimes you hear those discourses about Megaform from the 60s, and sometimes the brutal aesthetics and not well maintained through time. So what is the place of the Megaform today? Both Megaform as an artifact of that era, but also what the heritage of this thinking big and trying to create conditions of urbanity within a building. So what is the relevance of this for the public realm? And in the case, of the Bibliothèque here, I think it's working really good. So we were trying to bring the notion of Megaform on the contemporary tense and try to ask this question of what's the heritage of Megaform today in the Canadian built landscape.
Yeah, because we're also into the expansion of the Museum of
Art Contemporain.
And they're kind of going underground. So it's like we're coming back to some of that concept.
Yeah, exactly.
This image here with UConn, one of our goals was sort of to create a kind of dialogue between UConn, which is adjacent to the bibliothèque, and sort of compare their megaform and megastructure connections. Both tap into the transit system and sit above. Both pack a set of programs. The educational facilities a bit more maybe limited in this program. But as Tally said, the other distinction for the contemporary megaform, which differentiates it from Robson, let's say, is that public space is not a landscape concern. It maybe is sometimes an easier question. It's an internal question for the bibliothèque. And the notion that public space is now something interior to a building as it plays out in the bibliothèque with its sort of endless pockets and sort of living room-like functions explored in other, I think, architectures is an interesting one. I mean, you see families who go there with their children, it becomes a public space, and the project has been designed like that. It's quite complex and allows almost the same complexity of inhabitation that a landscape might offer. It's one of the interesting things about Robson is that there's so many things that can happen at the same time. It also gets into the issue of governance, right? In government or surveillance of the site. And this public mandate that the library brought is in part why you have its architectural expression of these social spaces, which isn't carried in other private, let's say, programs typically.